starting to transition into this part of the weather year, or this pattern in the weather cycle, where the AC is still in my room, and there's parts of the day where it is needed, but then there's parts in the evening where I'm like, well, you know what? I should probably turn it off. So we're heading soon, and I'm trying to fight it, but when you live in this part of the country, it's just inevitable, where the AC will come out, the foliage and the leaves will change. Sooner or later, we're going to go from wearing flannel to having to bundle up and wear about 18 or 19 different layers because it'll be freezing down here in these parts. But in the meantime, we salvage the best of the weather that we can. And on that note, I welcome you back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Mike the New Haven podcast, episode 374 on the docket here tonight with a very interesting guest. And as someone who is a buff of emergency vehicles, fire and police alike, I'm really glad that he's here tonight to explain some of the nuances that go into maintaining one of the largest, if not the largest, police fleet in the world. What I will say is, if you haven't checked out the previous episode, please do so. That was with Mitch Stern, and that was a very, very fun episode to do for Best the Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. Of course, Mitch was on the FDNY EMS side and was heavily involved in so many of the different operations involving EMS pre-merger with the FDNY and of course, post-merger with the FDNY. So that's one of the fun episodes that we've had, and I'm sure tonight will be fun as well. Just a quick shout out, because I was telling producer Victor this is weird for me as a New York Yankee fan, because in the modern era, you're very used, at least I am, especially in the Aaron Boone era, of the arch rivals getting the last laugh. Houston beats the garbage out of the Yankees every time they play them in the playoffs, and up until last night, so at Boston. But someone who did not live through the 2003 American League Championship Series, which the Yankees won, and that was until last night, the last time they had eliminated Boston from the playoffs, or the 1999 American League Championship Series. That was a new one for me, but it was quite the feeling. I even put on Facebook, I don't know what to do with my hands, but nevertheless, glad to see them do that. Shout out to Cam Schlittler, who produced one of the finest postseason performances I've seen as the New York Yankees roll on to the American League Division Series. And for now, at least, don't take more years off my life than they already have. But we're not ESPN. We're the Mike and New Haven podcast. There's a great guest to get to. I'm not going to keep him waiting, so we're going to roll a couple ads and get right into it. First things first, hey, we're talking about baseball, right? So, producer Victor and the Chop Seat. Baseball fans, if you bleed Braves country red and blue, this one's for you. Check out the Chop Seat podcast hosted by Victor Mignetis. Every week, Victor dives deep into all things Atlanta Braves and Major League Baseball, from game recaps and trade rumors to player spotlights and the latest league news. Whether it's breaking down the lineup, debating pitching rotations, or talking postseason chances, the Chop Seat gives you honest takes, sharp analysis, and a fan's true passion for the game. So if you're looking for your go-to Braves and MLB podcast, pull up a chair and join the conversation. Subscribe to the Chop Seat today on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. Because in Braves country, there's always room at the Chop Seat. Indeed there is. And even though his Braves are not in it, he's still, and I'm not saying that gloatingly, he's still doing a great job of covering the rest of the playoff picture. Because at the end of the day, it's about the game, not necessarily just the team you root for, but the game as a whole. And certainly him and I are big fans of the game. And of course, if you need a PI, come on now. You already know, folks. Don't go to anybody else. Go to one guy. Go to Billy Ryan. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike the New Haven podcast. Well, of course, as I talked about, it's important for police officers in New York City to get to these emergencies, but they're not going to be able to get to these emergencies if the cars aren't working, if the sector cars aren't working, certainly for the Special Operations Division, the members of emergency service, if their REPs aren't working. And my next guest certainly had a big role in the reason why New York City police cars were able to respond to any and all emergencies across the streets of the 5 boroughs in the first place, because for over 30 years, many of them as a mechanic, lastly, as a deputy commissioner in the Fleet Services Division. Tonight's guest played a central role in that. And like I said, I'm a big buff of emergency vehicles. He was involved in so many different iterations of the New York City Police Department's fleet. And that tonight is retired NYPD deputy commissioner from the Fleet Services Division, Bob Martinez. Bob, welcome. How are you? Can't hear you, Bob. Yeah, we lost the sound there on you for a second there. Still can't hear you. This might be a sudden, live podcasting at its finest, folks. You can try coming back out, Bob, and coming back in with the microphone. We'll unmute your microphone and we'll see what happens here. Sorry about this, folks. Stand by. Still don't have you. So we'll put you in the back for now, Bob. Try coming out and coming back in via the same link, and hopefully that'll rectify the issue there. Sorry about that, folks. Again, happens from time to time. No issue there. But like I said, Bob, ultimately, and we'll get into it tonight, was with the NYPD since the 80s. So think about it. He saw the transition from some of the older models into newer models. Let's see if we have them now. Bob, go ahead, say something. And still can't hear you. So, no, it's not getting salty, Joe. Sorry about this. We weren't having these issues before, I swear. But these issues are upon us now, unfortunately. So, don't quite know what's going on there. No, still can't hear you. So, hello to everybody tuning in. Terry Martínez is here. Joe Maliga, you're here as well. And still not able to get you. So we'll put you in the back for now and figure that out in the meantime until that situation resolves itself. No worries, folks. Again, this happens from time to time. It's not the first time we've had technical difficulties, won't be the last. But once we get that up and running, don't be afraid to put something in the live chat. Again, if you have a question, you know how it goes. We'll be able to highlight it, and there's a lot to highlight here because Bob was with the NYPD across a variety of different roles within fleet services for 33 years. He rose through the ranks to become a deputy commissioner, as we said in the introduction. So we will see just what went into that, some certain stories surrounding the fleet, and now, of course, we have Bob back. And let's see if you can move the camera a little bit back there, Bob.
Yeah. Is that any better?
Yeah, you just there you go. Now we got you. Okay. All right. So, before I get in, just make sure if you're using the phone, just make sure it's plugged in. That way the battery doesn't die on us mid-conversation. But as we go along here, one of the things I want to highlight before I get into anything involving, of course, your career is where did you grow up, if you grew up in the city, and what attracted you about the automotive industry early on in your life, if at all?
Yeah, I grew up in Queens Village, and I started working on motorcycles back in 1972. I was, enthusiast riding dirt bikes in the local parks and stuff, and I got into dirt bikes. I was actually 12 years old when I started working in my first motorcycle shop at New York Motorcycle, and that was in Belrose, and that's where I really started being a mechanic. And then actually, when I went through high school, they had a cooperative program for the seniors, and I was able to actually go to classes in the morning, and then the motorcycle shop guys would pick me up in the motorcycle van, and I would do mechanic work in the afternoon for my senior year. So that's what really started me. And I went to a vocational high school, so I have a high school diploma in both mechanics and academics.
And that's something that's obviously the pathway for what would come throughout the course of your career. So you mentioned being 17 years old. And around this time, I believe, was when you got into New York Motorcycle Club, which still exists today, working on motorcycles. I mean, it makes sense. You went from riding dirt bikes right to working on them, and you started when you were 12. So this was probably a very easy transition.
Yeah. So it's and that's kind of how I even got into the NYPD. So I did have my own motorcycle shop for a little while in between that. And then when I went back to work for New York Motorcycle, after I didn't do so well with my own business, we were selling parts to the NYPD. That's when the NYPD was using Yamaha scooters. So when the guy was picking up parts, I said, "Are they hiring anybody?" Because I started having kids and I needed a job with benefits. And that's how I started as an auto service worker. And from day one, when I went to work there, I started working on motorcycles. And what happened was they got a delivery of motorcycles literally the same day that I came to work for the NYPD. And they wanted someone to help get these motors. They bought 28 motorcycles. And back then, the motorcycles were, Harley Davidsons were still under AMF, and the quality wasn't very good. So my first job was with the NYPD, believe it or not, was to check out these, along with this other mechanic, Richie Cicero, check out the motorcycles, make sure, and we would actually have to ride them, put 100 miles on each motorcycle before we would give them to Highway Patrol and get all the bugs out. and literally test ride one of these motorcycles on the BQE. One of them went on fire while I was driving it, so it was a serious thing. And they all leaked oil back then. So that was my first job as an auto service worker. I wasn't even a mechanic yet. And then about 6 months after being an auto service worker, they promoted me to mechanic because they saw I had the aptitude to be a regular A mechanic. Yeah.
And again, that's something that we'll highlight over the course of our conversation tonight, too. And again, a lot of different components of the fleet that I do want to dive into. Before that, though, I will say, who taught you? Were you self-taught, or did a family member teach you?
Well, once again, I did go to vocational high school, so some of my learning on how to rebuild engines and that type of stuff I actually learned in high school, but a lot of it was self-taught. My grandfather actually rode a Harley motorcycle. He was in the Navy down in Louisiana and in New Orleans, actually. And he was in an organization, a Masonic organization called the Grotto, and he would ride Harley Davidson motorcycles in parades and stuff. So when he moved back to New York, he encouraged me to work on the motorcycle and showed me how to work on. He had a boat, work on a boat and stuff. So it was a combination of self-taught, my grandfather, and then high school.
And which high school was this?
Thomas Edison High School. It's still
Okay.
high school today in Jamaica, Queens.
Gotcha. So getting to the NYPD in 1986, I think at this time, and it's across the board because transit didn't have a lot of RMPs. They didn't really need them. But housing did. Obviously, the NYPD did. More so, were they still using the Plymouths in 86, or had they transitioned to the earlier versions of the Caprice by 86, 87?
No, they had the Plymouth Furies, and actually the reason why transit only had, until Bratton became the commissioner in the Transit Bureau, they only had Suburbans. They didn't have, so Transit Police didn't have anything but a Chevy Suburban. That was it. And then there was only one per station. And Bratton had a lot to do with them finally getting regular cars and RMPs. But yeah, so the Grand Fury was what I started with. I started working on the Grand Furies. So I was in the motorcycle shop for 3 years, and then roughly 3 years, so roughly 1989 was when I started working in the new car shop, which is where we started prepping the new cars and make them ready to go on the road. At that time we would install the lights. We would put the stripe down, the single stripe down the side back then, and then we started. What happened was we also right around that same time went from the Grand Fury to the Chevy Caprice right around 89. And then maybe a year, right around 89 going into 1990 was when they stopped the square Caprice with the metal bumpers, and they went into the bubble, what we call the bubble Caprice, which was the rounded shaped bumpers. And that was when we switched light bars, because originally we had the twin Sonic light bar that actually had a chain in it. One switch to work the lights on and off with a Scientific's product siren box. And then when we got was switching to the new Caprice, everybody was nervous about, was this car going to hold up? Right. So that was the car.
It's the older one, right?
Right. 1989, that was getting phased out. So what we did, we bought 2 years worth. We bought about 1,500 or 1,600 of those. We actually stockpiled those on a pier in Brooklyn. And see that light bar, that light bar was getting phased out too. So both the car and the light bar federal stopped making that light bar. The other bad problem with that light bar was that the siren was on the roof, so it was very bad for the ears of the operators. So then in 1990, the NYPD bought approximately 60 of the bubble type just as a pilot program, because they bought a double year's worth of the what we call the square model Caprice. Because we weren't sure if this car was going to work out. So they bought these 60. 5 of them were for highway patrol with the LT1 motor, and then the others had 6 cylinders in it. And that was the other 55. We tested them, and then I tested every light bar. They wanted me to, at this point, I was working at New Car. They wanted to see which light bar would be the best light bar to replace that light bar. So we tested everybody's bar, Whalen, Code 3, the list goes on. And then Federal was coming out this bar. So they gave us a bar to play with, and they gave California Highway Patrol a light to play with. And that's the V-shaped bar. And after testing that bar and playing with it, We decided that was the bar that we wanted to go with because it had a lot of safety options, had a lot more light output compared to any other light bar. And if I remember correctly, Commissioner Brown was the police commissioner at the time, and we did a news conference with that light bar and the new Caprice, and they asked me to take that car and go through the car wash. Well, we went through the car wash, and by the time I got out of the car wash, the light bar stopped working. It completely stopped. So now I had to go to a news conference with the police commissioner with a vehicle with no light bar to work. So I ran back to the shop. We took the case off the bar. We took a hair dryer, blew it out. As we were drying it, the light bar started to work. So then we made the news conference, and I remember showing the commissioner had a light bar worked and everything. And to be honest with you, he could care less. He says, "Listen, kid, just make believe." Because I was, it's only 20-something years old, and he goes, "Just make believe you're showing me the bar. I don't really care about how it works." So it was kind of interesting. So. What we did was, so because the light bar had 7 pods, we brought down 7 of these Caprices and lined them up in a V shape, just like the light bar, for the news, for photo op and the news conference, and that was the start. And then the car worked out well. So then in 1991, they changed the wheel well a little bit because the 90 car, half the rear wheel was covered, had a skirt over the rear wheel. It was very hard to change a rear tire and stuff. They then took that skirt out and made a regular wheel well opening on the rear of the car. And the other thing about that car, you could actually put a whole pizza on the dashboard because the dashboard was so big. And then the other thing, that was when bucket seats came out. The Caprices and the Furies had a bench seat, and that was the first car with bucket seats, and that caused a big problem because now when you were transporting prisoners, they could kick you, and there was no so now we had we realized we have to get cages. We never had cages in our cars until that car came along. So we changed the light bar. We put cages on there. And then the other problem was we didn't have metal bumpers, So now, we always had metal bumpers with added like almost like push bumpers added to the front of the vehicle. So then we had to add a small push bumper that we thought was necessary at the time. And we had that push bumper or something similar up until just over maybe 2 years ago. But that was the first Caprices, and they worked out quite well, for the department.
Oh, they were in service from really like when you got them, like 90, 91 up until even late 2000, early 2001. Quite a few of them were still in service, even if the color scheme had changed slightly. They lasted the NYPD quite a while. Ken Bowen's in the chat. He was a sergeant in emergency service and primarily in Truck 2 in Harlem. And he's asking this because the common theme back then was those Chevy Caprices in the 90s, especially in busier precincts, is the milk crates. When did the NYPD and where did the NYPD get the milk crates? He wants to know.
Yeah. Well, the problem with the milk crates is that the seats had a floor in them. They had a bolt that would break, and it would, and almost every one had happened to. So once that bolt broke, that was inside the seat would collapse backwards. So what everybody did, they would go to the local bodegas and get milk crates, and every car had a milk crate, for that seat bolt. And then eventually we came up with a fix for that, a little harder seat in that. But on the good side is that the cars with the cages, the seat couldn't go too far back.
Right. And that was a plus. And and there was a little bit around, it really started 91, 92 as well as a changing of the color scheme, because back then the design of this was in big letters, and you saw with the picture I shared earlier, the Plymouth Fury, big letters, the number of the precinct, and then PCT next to it. And then, of course, the white stripe with the logo of the police department on the side. Then you went to what is, again, like as I told you off the air, my favorite version of the fleet for a while. And the NYC police, NYC, then the NYPD logo, then police after it. Changed the scheme around to where it's still primarily blue and white, but less of an emphasis on the white for the time being and more of an emphasis on the blue precinct number on the back. As a mechanic at the time, of course, you weren't quite in a supervisory role yet. That didn't come until 97, which we'll talk about. Did you have a hand in suggesting that, or was that more the top brass commissioner-wise suggesting that change in the style of the fleet?
Yeah, they, that was Commissioners Kelly first time around. He might have actually been first deputy commissioner when we did that change. So they decided they wanted a new decal scheme for for the 1990. And at the same time, uh, the Democratic Convention was coming to town. So at one time, one of the decal schemes was actually a Statue of Liberty with a red, white, and blue flag. I have some pictures hidden away of probably 40 different designs that we came up with. And then they even hired an outside company that didn't work out. And around the same time, they bought us a decal machine so we could actually cut the decals out in house. We would do them in paper, put them up, and then come up with some, 3 or 4 different schemes. And then Commissioner Kelly would come down with his entourage, and like I said, I don't even think he was even the commissioner. He might have been the first step. He came with his group and looked at all the different designs. And then when we had to change, that was when I think we went from NYC to NYPD. And I think that was when Bratton took over as police commissioner. And then a short time after that, we actually started buying the Ford Crown Vicks came in right around early 90s as well. So and then we went to the white scheme around that same time. And it wasn't too far in between. It might have been a little later, maybe 94, with the Crown Vic and the white car, and then we started with the CPR on the side of the car as well.
So that was just piecing my timetable together. We're talking with Bob Martinez here in the Mike the New Haven podcast. He's retired deputy commissioner out of the New York City Police Department Fleet Services Division. That was so 92, or actually no, 91 to 96 is the NYC police era. When Safer came in, I believe, is when they went 96, 97 to the whites, heavier emphasis on the white. And I think it was something schematically where it just cost less, I believe, was the reason why they went to more of the white style cars.
Yeah. So that blue was called Grabber Blue.
Yeah.
And some years we were paying as much as $1,000 extra to get that put on at the factory. So doing some budget cuts and what have you. Like I say, I wasn't in a supervisory role at that point, making those decisions. But it was a cost factor to just go white, and that's what we did. We just went white, and then we just had to come up with a little different decal scheme and stuff. And yeah.
Yeah, no, that was something that was pushed for quite a while. Commissioner Safer also came up with the CPR motto on the side. And again, anything that's cost effective made sense. And the design didn't look bad. It's still a design the NYPD uses to this day. It's a beautiful design. And it looked great on those old school Ford Crown Vics and those old school Chevy Caprices as well of that era. What I was going to ask you too, as far as the change from NYC, because it was gradual. It went from NYC Police to NY Department logo PD. There was a few RMPs that had that. Sure. I have a picture of that I'll share momentarily. And then we went to, as you said, NYPD Police. Now, I talked about it off the air. It kind of seemed redundant in nature, but I heard this and read this some time ago, and you can confirm if it's true or not. The reasoning being by Commissioner Safer and Mayor Giuliani at the time, out-of-towners, particularly those from other countries coming in, seeing a car, it'd be easier to identify it as the police if it said NYPD Police as opposed to NYC Police. So they basically wanted it to be less vague, I believe.
Yeah, and the branding, NYPD. I mean, even today, when I go traveling, and people find NYPD, all of a sudden, they're like, people it's just known throughout the world. It's NYPD right. Is it? That's not and the same thing with FDNY, right? It's FDNY, so it's just
exactly
not New York City Police. It's NYPD. I mean, even look at the TV shows and everything else, So
exactly,
yeah, just name recognition is what is what happens there with that. But yeah, but prior to Safer getting there, that was when Bratton was there for a short period of time.
Yeah.
So Bratton was the guy who really wanted from what I remember, I'm getting old now, is the Crown Vicks. And the Crown Vicks, they had overhead cam, they had 4-wheel disc brakes. There was a lot of benefits to the Crown Vic. And then the Crown Vic lasted a real long time. Even though there was some, serious issues with the Crown Vic as far as driving in the snow and the rain, and then the water ingestion. If you went through more than 7 inches of water at any speed with a Crown Vic, that water got into the engine and seized the motor up, and then the motor was junk.
Yeah, that was just not something that you want, especially for that time of year, which is, again, we have a 6 month winter around these
Yeah,
parts. And I've often said, especially as someone that grew up watching Cops on a Saturday night on Fox with my grandmother a lot back then, it's the greatest police car ever made. And for those of you watching on YouTube, you're seeing this is the design I was talking about. This is an emergency service, probably belonged to a supervisor in ESU back then.
yeah,
This is a patrol car but pertaining to ESU where it has the NY department logo, then PD decal on the side of it with the striping. But again, that was something that really up until 2013, 2014, even a little bit later than that, it started to be phased out. That lasted because you can go back to any picture, just type in New York City, 1998, 1999. The modern version of the RIPs with the Crown Vics, you're seeing them all the way back then. Taxi cabs were using them. The NYPD was using them. So those cars were quite literally timeless up until they stopped making them, of course.
yeah, yeah.
So we're talking Bob Martinez here, like I said, on the Mike the New Haven podcast. Hello to Del Rey, 53, also retired from the job. And Garrett Lindgren, retired from the FDNY. Another question from John Costello, who's retired off the job, but not in New York and Pennsylvania. He was a sergeant on police force out there. He says, maybe I missed it, but did NYPD closely follow the Michigan State Police evaluations of the different manufacturers' offerings for patrol vehicles?
Later on, originally we did our own testing. We would actually, somebody would identify, and this was before I was really, when I was making the decisions, we did use as a guideline, but not 100%, obviously not, because we had the first hybrid police cars in the world, and they weren't Michigan State tested. But we use it as a guide, Michigan, and there's a lot of confusion with what Michigan State does. And I was actually just out in LA County, sheriffs doing some EVOC training with them, and they evaluate the car. They don't certify the car. There's nothing on a car that's certified. The only thing that's certified is a speedometer plus a minus 2 miles an hour, and that's so they could give a speeding ticket if they're tailing you. So the cars are just evaluated, but the manufacturers rate them that they are a police vehicle. They don't even like to say pursuit rated. Sometimes they use that word. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they say pursuit ready. Because of liability reasons. But I always preferred to get, once I was a little higher in the food chain, was to get something that was evaluated by Michigan State, if that would meet our needs. Because the vehicles are set up a little different, so they do the evaluation, but they're doing, top speed, they're doing, 0 to 60, 0 to 100, and they're doing brake testing, they're doing ergonomics. So it's a great tool to use to see if the vehicle, compare one vehicle to another vehicle. But nowadays it's getting so limited that, there's not even that many vehicles being tested because, Chevy's only making a Tahoe, right?
Yeah.
Even, yeah. And in Stellantis is, did away with the Charger. They had the Durango.
Which I hate.
Right. The Ford Explorer is the meat and potatoes now. And, I had some things that do with that at some point, with going out to Ford and some of the hybrid cars. So Michigan State is a great tool to help evaluate things, but it's not the end all, because we're getting to a point, especially during the chip shortage, it was irrelevant that departments were starting to look at other ways. And now with the, going green and hybrid vehicles and electric vehicles, that if you have a mandate, state mandate or local mandate to go green or go fuel efficient, there's only one electric vehicle that's pursuit rated, and that's the Chevy Blazer now. And in my opinion, it's a little too small for most departments to really do what they need to do. But Michigan State does play a role. It's great reading, but it's not the end all making decisions of what the NYPD buys, because obviously an REP is not Michigan State, right? They don't test trucks, right? So and then they even motorcycles. Sometimes they test motorcycles, sometimes they don't test motorcycles. But it's a good tool. And then LA County does their own testing. So you have Michigan State testing. LA County does almost the same type of testing, and sometimes it almost seems like they're competing against one another. Michigan State testing was actually going on last week when I was out in LA County at the EVOC convention. At the LA County Sheriff's at this exact same time was the Michigan State testing going on.
Thank you for that question earlier that was submitted there, John Costello. And hey to Mitch Stern, I see you in the chat, my friend. Good to see you. And again, I really enjoyed the conversation we had the other day. It was great. So 97 is when you become a supervisor. So generally, in terms of how many people are under you, how many people are under you, and what's the day-to-day like? What are your hours?
Yeah. So when I was a supervisor, I was supervisor of a new car shop because that's where I kind of came from. And I was also actually when I first became supervisor, I was working in Manhattan. So I went to Pier 76, which was an outside shop. So that shop we had about let's say 20 people, maybe 12 mechanics and auto service workers and a couple civilians. I was taking care of most of Manhattan in that shop. I was actually right on the water, just below the Intrepid. And we did also the traffic. People were there. It was right next to the tow pound. The shop was actually connected to the New York City tow pound on the west side of Manhattan. So we would fix the tow trucks. We would fix regular police cars. We had the mounted unit there, and I was there for about 2.5, 3 years on the pier.
Good place to be. Pat Pogan, glad you're feeling better, my friend. Good to see you in the chat, too. Another guy that had experience riding those old Ford Emergency Service RAPs. He was an ESU himself from 86 to 98, so he remembers those vehicles quite well. In terms of different, there's different styles. Of course, the commissioner and whoever's in charge wants it done a certain way. But as a supervisor, what's nice is you can blend everybody's strengths together. And you've been at it a while. By 1997, when this promotion came in, it'd been about 11 years. So just tell me about learning to manage different talents and the joys of having so many different styles underneath you to combine to, of course, keep the fleet running.
Yeah. So that particular shop, because they also keep in mind, 1996. What happened? We had two mergers, right?
Yeah.
We took over the traffic division, and we took over DOT.
Mm-hmm.
So traffic was part of DOT, and then we also took over the transit police, almost around the same time.
And housing too.
And housing, right? So all this was going on. So now we had, and some people's fleets weren't as good as other people's fleets. So, so we had all that going on, and so we were repairing those vehicles, and yeah, it was quite an interesting time because we had to like evaluate the vehicle, like which vehicles are good, which weren't. But all along throughout my career, the people I worked with at the NYPD, some of these mechanics, the talent that was there, and the people we got from these other agencies, it was just incredible because they brought a little different perspective than people that grew up or kind of did their whole career in the NYPD. We got to see a little different way of doing things. Especially we didn't have we added 130 tow trucks with the traffic division. And these tow trucks were pretty beat up because they do a lot of impounding of vehicles in New York City. They still do. It's a major. They won't admit it, but it's a major source of income for the city. It's millions and millions of dollars they bring in impounding vehicles. So that was a priority, was keeping these tow trucks going. But it was really great. At the same time, I was going to engineering school, and so when we had different problems with the vehicles, I was using some of my education to try to do it, which got me in trouble actually a couple of times because my bosses got embarrassed because I was identifying problems that they didn't want to make public or deal with. Because you have some public servants that really want to do the right thing and make things better and fix stuff. There's other public servants that they don't want anything additional on their desk. If you bring more work, you're a bad guy.
Right.
And I was also writing employee suggestions at the same time, so they didn't like me so much because I was, employee suggestions sometimes cause people work too, even though you might be saving someone's life or making a vehicle better. So, so there was one point where we had some tow trucks that were questionable how safe they were. Because what governs a tow truck is the weight on the front wheels. So a lot of apparatuses can pick up a heavy vehicle, but if you make the front wheels too light, you can't steer the vehicle safely. So there's actually you put some scales on a vehicle and you do some calculations, and you want a certain amount of percentage of the weight of the vehicle still on the front wheels so you could safely steer it. So we were me and the other guys in the shop, along with some I was taking obviously a lot of math classes in engineering school.
Understandably, right?
We were doing all these calculations, and it turned out these tow trucks we were buying weren't very safe, and that was a real issue. So my director at the time, this guy Lenny Lesko, he goes to a meeting. But what happened was when I was doing these calculations, one of the heads of the traffic division saw me doing it, and he goes, "Why are you doing this?" I says, "Because guys are complaining that they can't steer safely with the vehicle, so I'm just verifying some numbers." And then the operating manual, the owner's manual for the tow truck, it told you how to do this calculation and figure it out. So I didn't realize that my director was going to a meeting and this guy was going to a meeting, and they were bringing up the concerns about the new tow trucks because they bought 130 of them. And then they said, well, Bob Martinez is checking these tow trucks out. And I didn't have the authority to do that because I was just a first line supervisor. I wasn't working in the tech office or working for the director. So basically at the time, the executive director of support services and the director of fleet services got embarrassed because I identified a real safety problem with these tow trucks. So the director, right after that meeting, came to the shop, and then he transferred me. I was in a lot of trouble. I got a command discipline saying that I was insubordination, and I was transferred for a year. They made me go to a different shop every day, and there were some other people that were in the food chain at it that didn't appreciate my concern with the safety, so they made me pay the price, and they tried to demote me, but they couldn't demote me because I was in the union. So it wasn't all great stuff. But before that happened, I was also playing around with LED lighting. So the NYPD was probably the first police department in the world to have LED lighting. So I was taking a semiconductor class. And so we had the V bar, which is all halogen. There was 7 halogen lights, and then on the highway cars we had another, I think, 8 halogen lights on the high riser. If you put that light bar on, all the lights on, within 45 minutes the battery would be dead. There's no alternator that could keep up with it. And this is another real safety, because you could have a highway car blocking a lane on the highway, and then the whole car goes dead, and the guy's out there with it. Just imagine on the FDR with a dead car with dark. And
Right.
nobody wanted to address the problem. So one day driving to Pier 76, I noticed as I was stopped at a red light that the post office trucks had LED stoplights, and they were the exact same size as the lights that were on the high rise or the highway cars. So I was like, I wonder if they'll fit. So I went down to the post office. Has a repair shop on the West Side Highway down South Manhattan. I went down there to see where they bought those lights, and I got in touch with the company, and I took a high riser from a highway car and converted it from halogen lights to LED lights. And I reduced the draw by like 85 amps. It went from 85 amps down to like 6 amps for the whole just the high riser bar. So I wanted the tech office to take a look at this and figure out, maybe possibly look into LED lighting, and they didn't want to come down. But one thing, we have the meat market not too far from where we were working. So I offered them a steak dinner. I said, listen, I'll give you a steak dinner if you come down. I want to show you this light bar that we did some modifications to. So they came down for the steak lunch, and had the light bar running, right? And they said, well, it's not that bright, the LEDs. And I said, well, what's powering it up? And they're looking around the barrel. They couldn't figure out what's powering. I had the whole light bar and the flasher running on a 9-volt battery. A transistor battery.
Imagine.
So they were like, wow. I said, you want it brighter? Now I hooked it up to a 12-volt battery, and it got brighter. So that was the beginning of LEDs. So then we got on the phone with Federal Signal, Whalen, who we were buying lights from. We go, listen, LEDs, you got to get into the LED market. So we actually helped, foster the LED market. And at the time, LEDs were only originally available on red, and eventually yellow. Now they're available in white. But the early LEDs was very limited to color schemes that you could get. And then we got Federal to switch the V-bar to LEDs as well. So when we did that, we went from 150 amp draw down to literally both light bars down to like 10 amps, 10, 12 amps with the LEDs. It was just amazing. And the life of the lights lasted forever, because LEDs have a much longer life than that. The halogen's only good for a certain amount of hours. So that was one of my claims to fame, NYPD claims to fame, that we were the first department to really push the F with LEDs and reduce the load.
And the thing is, too, as the NYPD goes, you talked about earlier how the NYPD, people know it worldwide. So the rest of the law enforcement community goes. There's certain departments that have that kind of cachet. You think of the NYPD, you think of the LAPD, whatever they're doing. cities and towns across the country, maybe even certain parts of the world, are going to follow suit, and that's just one of them. Again, there's another thing, like we talked about the color schemes earlier, that the NYPD is still utilizing in large part to this day and has been fostering the market, because of the fact that, listen, especially in scenes and where you're going to be at a while, you don't want to worry about your lights going dead, especially if you're going to be on the highway for whatever the reason is. I mean, we talked earlier about pursuit rated. It's kind of hard to have a pursuit in New York City, for a variety of reasons. It's a foot pursuit, sure. A car pursuit depends on where you are. Staten Island, certain parts of Queens, sure. Other parts, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Manhattan, maybe not so much. But nevertheless, it really does influence greatly how members are able to operate on the road. And again, the more RAPs, or rather, RMPs, rather, not REPs, I'm thinking about ESU, that can stay in service, obviously, the better it is in the long run in terms of calls and jobs that are being held when these guys hop into sector cars, being able to be responded to in a timely manner. I guess in line with me having a Freudian slip and mentioning REPs, the SOD vehicles, the emergency service vehicles, the bomb squad vehicles, working on those, was the procedures any different because of the special type of emergencies these units would normally respond to?
Well, so we would, all our vehicles. So we did out of service numbers and stuff. So we would call them. We brought them into another category. So we called them 911 responders. So ESU and Highway Patrol, and then the 78 precincts. So there's 98 commands, with housing and transit, but the 78 regular, community precincts, their vehicles, the RMPs, they're the priority. So they got first priority. We had to keep those numbers up, and we even had a loaner fleet. So we would only let a certain amount of those vehicles go out of service, and if we couldn't repair them and get them back on the road within a 24-hour period, and 5 o'clock in the morning, that report came out every day. Then we would give them loaner vehicles to offset the out of service numbers. But we had so the regular shops. Now that some of the regular shops are doing some of the REPs. So we had, Central Repair Shop was our main shop for fixing the issue trucks. Now we have also a shop down in Floyd Bennett Field, which I opened up probably 15 years ago, maybe even more. But prior to that, we didn't have that shop, and the only shop was really the truck shop, which was in Woodside, New York. And it takes a special, there's a lot of, it's similar to like a fire truck. It takes a special mechanic because they have special, they carry a lot more weight. The other problem with ESU is that when they bring a truck in, they have to unload the whole truck.
That's true.
So
it's carrying a
lot of equipment on those trucks, both the big and the small. So we didn't want to take them off the road. We'd let them come in, and then we had a guy called Roadside Rick. If any of the ESU guys that are on, they probably know or heard of Roadside Rick, because he was very famous in ESU. And he would go around fixing these trucks in their house so they wouldn't have to unload them. He did a lot of work out there fixing these trucks. And then years ago, we actually had a mechanic die at truck 2 working on a truck. He was under the truck, and it rolled a little bit, and he got killed under that truck. So the guys, he was working on the truck, doing some work on the rear end. And the guys went out and actually went to get him coffee, came back and said, "Larry, we got your coffee, your coffee." And he never answered, and the truck rolled, and the differential hit his chin and broke his neck, and he died under the truck. Yeah, so but the ESU guys. So that was that funeral was really incredible, because the ESU came out with such support, and that was where I don't know if it was the commissioner at the time or the CEO of ESU came out with the thing is that when a cop needs help, he calls ESU. But when ESU need help, they call Fleet Services, because ESU can't do their job without their car. Actually, no cop can do their job.
Exactly. I was going to say, no cop can. If their cars aren't running, listen, they need you.
The most important thing, right? The most important tool. A cop can do his job without a gun. He can do his job without a computer. As such, that cops cannot do their job without a vehicle. And ESU respected that. And it was such a great relationship with Fleet Services and ESU over the years, and especially with Roadside Rick, with what he did on a daily basis with these guys to keep them up and running.
Well, listen, I can't speak English today. Like I said in the introduction of you, just as important as to your point about a police officer being able to do his job is him or her being able to get to that job in the first place. You can't be functional. You can't make the situation more tenable for whoever's called you if you don't ever get there. So the
Yep.
fact of the matter is, fleet services oftentimes is the heartbeat of the job in many a sense because you quite literally, no pun intended, keep the department rolling. And I want to go back to a second, or for a second, I should say, to 94, 95, because you touched on it earlier and I wanted to dive back into it if possible. You had a lot of RMPs come over from housing because they were, again, being an above ground department. That's no knock on transit. Transit was for the subways. You inherited their rescue REPs. You inherited, of course, their patrol RMPs. You got a little bit of the same from transit too. Then it's a small detail to many, but not to me. And this is why I wanted to ask you, and I got the right guy for it. Painting them over. You got to paint over the transit now, welcome them into the NYPD. And at this time, it's still heavy on the grab a blue, as you mentioned earlier, and the white. So how long did that process take to paint all the old transit and housing RPs over into NYPD decal?
To be honest with you, I don't remember actually painting too many of them over. I think most of their fleet was junk. I think we actually bought replacement vehicles.
Okay.
I really don't remember, both transit and housing. Really, we did repaint some of them, like especially with their, other vehicles. Understand back then, we only kept a vehicle for 36 months. Actually, the Grand Fury's life cycle was 26 months. That
Wow.
was so very quickly we were turning the fleet over. We
Right.
were buying 1,500 cars a year sometimes. And then when we had transit and housing, 36 months was the life. So now the life cycle 60 months. So we didn't have to really repaint many of those cars. So basically we replaced them. I don't remember it being a big issue painting or trying to re-decal those vehicles at all. Yeah.
Good to know, especially considering the fact, again, yeah, older model cars, a little bit more difficult to maintain for sure. If you have to junk them, hey, whatever keeps the member safe, because you got to remember, and again, there's different factors in play as to why a lot of cops get hurt seriously and if not killed in auto accidents on the job. I mean, around that time, Dave Willis got killed going to a shots fired call, got ejected from the vehicle. A few months later, or a few years later, rather, Dave Reagan got killed responding to a similar situation, shots fired job, of course, which unfortunately resulted in him losing his life. So you never want it to be, you don't want these cops to get hurt or killed in the first place, but you never want it to be a situation where their car failed them. If it's something where somebody drove into their way when they weren't supposed to, ran a light, tragic, yes, but at least you can say, okay, the car they were in that day is not the reason why they died or why the reason why they ended up suffering a very serious injury that alters their career and their life. Now, unfortunately, when 9/11 came around, this is a problem the FDNY faced. This is a problem the Port Authority Police faced in the aftermath, and certainly a problem that was definitely not exempt to the NYPD. So, besides the human cost of it, losing 23 cops that day, so many of the fleet that responded down there was destroyed when the towers collapsed. And it took a long while across the board for the whole department, didn't matter what unit or patrol bureau you belonged to replace those vehicles. If you don't have an exact count of how many were destroyed that day, that's fine. But nevertheless, just getting a tally of how many apparatus were heavily damaged, if not destroyed, and then the process to replace them. What was that like?
Right, right. Well, Phil, keep in mind, we didn't know if we're going to be attacked the next day, the next week. So,
Right.
mindset to get the fleet rolling, and we had support from across the world, but especially the United States. We had, General Motors was on the Ford was on the phone, Harley Davidson, everybody wanted to bring us vehicles, donate vehicles, give us vehicles. So we had to, put together a plan, figure out, what was destroyed, what wasn't destroyed. Like in the case of REPs, there was REPs. Some of them, the cab was crushed, but the box wasn't. There was some of the box was crushed, but the cab wasn't. So we would make one good one. We had rolling chassis coming in, from General Motors, and anybody who could give us a rolling chassis that we could, maybe put a box on the back of it. We had about 80 cars that were destroyed 100%. But we had 180 cars that we cleaned. So it was unbelievable. And I'm still trying to find the pictures of it. So what happened was when the buildings came down, everything turned into dust. And it was the closest thing to a nuclear reaction without being a nuclear reaction. So what happened was this dust got into all these vehicles. So we would take off a door panel or even a taillight cover, and it would be packed with this dust. Like it looked like spray foam insulation. The lens wasn't broken, but yet this dust was packed in there. So what we had to do, and this was 180 cars, and it took a year and a half before we were finally done doing it. We had to take these cars to the shop, completely disassemble them, power wash them, vacuum them, and then put them back together. Unfortunately, 5 guys who were the overtime guys doing that, they're dead today. We have
9/11 cancer.
Correct. We have 25 guys, including myself, that are certified in things that we're sick from for the rest of our lives because we're dealing with that dust.
Yeah.
And that dust was everything from human remains to computers to asbestos, et cetera, et cetera. So that was really what we did, and we did get money from the federal government. We got money from the federal government for reimbursement for fuel for repairing those vehicles, and then we did get vehicles back. But the thing was, the vehicles that got destroyed were considered a hazmat. So those vehicles were really supposed to be brought to Staten Island and then eventually destroyed, and they were brought over to New Jersey. And then I don't know what they did with them, but they were considered a hazmat because of the dust that was on. This is the vehicles that weren't repairable. And that's one reason when you go to the museum today, there's no NYPD vehicles in the 9/11 museum. There's no even parts from cars in the 9/11 museum. And that's because we were told by the federal government it was a hazmat, and all that stuff had to be considered hazmat. And if you wanted a replacement vehicle, you had to get rid of the vehicle and it had to be documented. And that's why to this day it's a sore spot with me that our vehicles are not in that museum.
Yeah, I mean, understandable for its time, but obviously it'd be great to preserve the history. And they have uniforms and badges from certain members who responded that day. I think Morris Smith's badge might be in that museum, and Mike Curtin's uniform is over at the U.S. Marine Corps Museum as well. So some certain aspects of it are preserved, but the vehicles, you have parts, because, for example, and again, not knocking them, it should be there. Truck 3 on the FDNY side, a part of that truck, I believe the entirety of that truck, which was destroyed in the collapse that day, is in the museum.
Right.
Which highlights, freezes you in time.
Well,
I think.
Because someone didn't follow the federal mandate, so that's why it's a real sore spot with me. Now, Mara Smith, I heard her on the radio. I don't know if you heard that radio recording of her or the building coming down while she was on the radio. She was on citywide frequency as the building came down, and to this day, I can hear her voice in my head as the building was coming down. And she actually was one of my neighbors. She actually lived close to
wow.
Belrose, Queens. Yeah.
She, her last words were simply a call for help over the radio. Because I think, she didn't die right away in the collapse. I don't believe. I think she was severely injured in it, but the extent of the injuries and just it was chaotic. They couldn't get to her in time. But again, a quick aside on more before we continue. I mean, you talk about courage. There's, of course, the iconic picture of her leading that businessman away from the South Tower, who was bleeding heavily. She was one of the first. She was on patrol that morning out of the 13th precinct with Bobby Fazio, who also didn't make it that day. And they see this plane hit. She gets eyewitness statements, puts it very calmly over the radio, hops in the RMP with Bobby. They go down to the scene. Neither one of those people, neither one of those officers ever came back. And out of the 13th precinct, that day, it was Brian McDonald from Truck 1 ESU, Maura and Bobby that did not answered that call, but did not return. And Garrett Lindgren says Engine 6 too is in the New York State Museum, as it should be. Thanks for that input, Garrett. I appreciate it. Adds further context. So moving ahead, and again, thank you for mentioning her. She deserves to be mentioned. You mentioned earlier, on a more lighter note, taking a lot of math classes, and that's going to come in handy, especially as you ascended. You end up making director in 2006, and of course, executive director in 2010. The budget, at least back then, was $90 million. So that's a lot of, again, no pun intended, moving parts to keep track of. You're not the only one keeping track of it. You have people helping you. But that day-to-day of saying, okay, this is where this money's going. This is where that money's going. Can we cut back on this? Because maybe we don't need it. We should probably put more money here. What was that process like?
Right. Well, even before, so prior to me becoming director, or when I was being considered for director, I was working in the new car shop as a second line supervisor, and they wanted me to go down to be interviewed to be director, and I was never deputy director, so it was like a long shot for me to be even considered to be director. So I went down there, and I don't even remember all the politics involved because I'm not a political guy. I'm an operations guy, and I had no hopes on the job. So the chief at the time of support services calls me down, is interviewing me, and he decided, and I had my engineering degree at the time. And so he made the decision that he wanted to make me the director. So he goes up to Commissioner Kelly and says, I want Bob Martinez to be the director. And I was already doing some work at the police commissioner. Kelly knew me a little bit. And then his chief of staff told the chief, told the chief at the time that he don't make the decision, that the police commission makes a decision on who's going to be in charge of the fleet, because the fleet's the most important tool that the NYPD has. This was a Wench, his name was. So they call me down and they say, you're being considered to be director, but Joe Wench wants to talk to you first. So I go to Joe Wench and he says, listen, you're the number one candidate. The chief wants to make you the director. What's your biggest concern? I says, my biggest concern is we're not buying enough vehicles. And he goes, what do you mean? I says, well, X number of vehicles. Like I said, I think that at that time, the life cycle was 36 months. It might have been 42 months. So in a perfect world, every vehicle that's going to reach the end of its life cycle, whether it's 36 months or 42 months, you should have money to replace that vehicle in that 12-month period in a perfect world. And we were, at that particular year, we did not have enough money. This was before I was director. So I explained this to him, and then I, basically I had it written out almost on a napkin, and he understood what I was saying because he was a bean counter. He came from the financial end of the business there in the NYPD, even though at this point he was chief of staff.
Right.
So he calls Fleet as I'm going back to Fleet. Now the guys in Fleet don't even know that I'm being considered for director at the time. So now they get a call from the chief of staff. And he's telling them that I told him we're not buying enough vehicles. I get back and I get, summoned up to the office there, the director's office. And they go, Bob, why were you downtown? And, so I'm like, do I tell them that, why I'm downtown? So they said, well, you said you weren't buying, we're not buying enough vehicles. How do you know that? And so I originally, I'm a little bit of a wise guy sometimes. So I said, well, I just guessed. I just figured, But then they go, no, really? I said, no, then I showed them the math. I said, listen, this number of vehicles are reaching life cycle this year, and we're only buying this number of vehicles. We should be buying this number of vehicles. So literally, within 24 hours of that conversation, Joe Wench put another $3 million into the fleet's budget to buy additional vehicles, so we would have the right amount of vehicles. So that's what started this thing called an aging chart. So to this day, the NYPD has an aging chart. So we have every vehicle, every category vehicle listed by age. From months, 1 month to 12 months, 12 months to 24 months, and we can look on that chart at any given day and look at and actually see how many vehicles or every category we should be buying in a perfect world. And so we had that budget. So, by having that data and having commissioners like Commissioner Kelly, Commissioner Bratton, Commissioner O'Neill believe in me because I could show them mathematically and why I was doing things, they let me run the ball with that. And I remember even going to Bratton, asking him a question. I wanted to buy some vehicles, and he said, Bob, you're in charge of the fleet. Don't worry about it. You make a decision. If you make a bad decision, we'll deal with it. But this, I don't need to know about these operations. And they let me have a lot of latitude. So I basically, from when I was director all the way through the day I retired, I made almost all the decisions on fleet. I mean, I had a great team, but I would have final word, and every spec for every vehicle, my tech guys would write the specifications. That specification would be sent to me. I would bring it home, go page by page, line by line, read the specifications, and I would find something wrong with every spec. And until I was happy with the spec, it didn't go out to bid. But that was just a relationship we had. And the problem is that towards the end of my, once they came out, defund the police and de Blasio, they stopped buying vehicles. They only started buying vehicles this year. They actually, this year, they're buying 1,000 vehicles currently, and they're going to be buying 1,000 vehicles for the next 2 or 3 years. But they probably need 4,000 vehicles today. Their added service rate went from probably 5% up to 30% currently today. It might even be worse than that in some commands, because you got to buy replacement vehicles. It's just so important to keep these vehicles are hot seated. They run 24/7. You need the replacement vehicles. You can't afford not to. It's a penny wise, dollar foolish not to keep your fleet current.
How much input in line with that are you getting from guys and gals on the street who are riding these cars in terms of what they want, good things they're seeing, not so good things they're seeing that are making things harder for them to drive or just to function on a comfort level in these cars? How much input? I mean, you listen, you seem like the kind of guy to put your ear to the street. How much input were you getting from them?
Yeah, well, I do. I mean, I would do that constantly. I talk to the cops. I talk to guys in shop. But part of my thing was with the spec guys, and this guy Jim Kuroki was my last spec guy, and he's really an amazing guy with specs. And I used to say, and he would quote me on saying all the time, every specification for a vehicle needs to be better than the last spec. So we always got to learn, make our contracts better. But in developing that, the two most important people is the end user and the mechanic. The mechanic knows what's working and what's not working and what needs to be fixed, right? And the end user knows what needs to be, what the vehicle needs to meet the mission. So the rules were with any vehicle, and even if we bought I'm circling back to Michigan State, even if we bought a non-Michigan State evaluated vehicle, whatever vehicle we bought for whatever mission, it has to meet the mission and it has to be safe. Those were paramount. If the vehicle didn't meet the mission, the vehicle is useless. And that's my a little bit of concern with the Chevy Blazer that's coming out, because it's very hard to fit prisoners back. They're a little small. It's very limited on equipment. But once again, mission, safety, and then if we can go green with a hybrid car, electric car, that's fine. But those were the two. So that was the criteria that my spec riders had. The vehicle had to meet the mission. We had to get feedback from the mechanics, feedback from the end users, and that's why we were rated since 2008 as the best run police department in the country, top 100 fleet, top 100 green fleet, top 100 police fleet, not just police fleet, government fleet. So out of 4,000 or 5,000 government fleets around the country, we were rated top many times top 10.
And that's something I'm sure you were very proud of. How could you not be?
Absolutely, and that helped us a lot, because there was a time done in Bloomberg where he wanted to privatize all the fleets. He wanted to outsource all the fleet work. They brought consultants in, and the consultants came around. They evaluated all the fleets, and you know what happened? They ended up giving us more work. So instead of privatizing the fleet, they gave us another 2,000 cars to fix. So we ended up with DEP's fleet and DOT's fleet about 15 years ago, maybe probably more than that now. And that's how come to this day the NYPD fixes the light duty fleet for DOT and DEP.
And again, who knows that fleet better than you guys?
Yeah.
Again, and you can outsource this all you want to. They can get a full rundown of things, but you know the ins and outs. And again, familiarity is what helps here. You know the ins and outs. You have your ear to the street. You've been doing it a long time, going back to the 80s. So there's certain knowledge because of transitions of fleets past, like we talked about earlier, with some of the decals and some of the vehicles that came in and out in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, to where you're going to know where to take it, whereas these outside consultants don't. And that's no knock on them. They just don't know. There's not enough familiarity there. So that familiarity is what allows these vehicles to run, because of the fact that some of these guys like yourself go so far back. How could they not know? You could forget more about the NYPD fleet than a lot of these guys could ever hope to know.
Yep, that's very true.
It's not hyperbole to say that at all. So that being said, I mean, you mentioned something interesting too in terms of Bratton being able to really give you a lot of latitude, which helps in the decisions that you're making. So when you became a deputy commissioner in September of 14, cool moment. You've been at it almost 30 years by that point. So to go as you came into a mechanic, which is not a bad gig in and of itself, pays great, as we talked about earlier, to that. Tell me what that moment was like when you found out you were going to get that role.
Well, that was used. So in any military, semi-military thing is stars, right? So when you're a director, you're considered a 1-star. And this is all the guy who started the stars was who was it? John Miller. Miller with Bratton, right? Because before that, there was the deputy commissioners didn't even have badges, so, and nobody in between. So he started all this star stuff, and so as a director, technically you're 1-star. Then executive director, you're 2-star, and the chief I replaced, who was in charge of support services at the time, he was a 2-star chief. So I came in as an executive director, which is a 2-star spot in theory. And then at the time, I was the only executive director. So now when he made me a 3-star, and this guy, Bill Flynn, he was the original executive director before that chief. He always wanted and really wanted to be a deputy commissioner. He might even be listening. I don't know. But and that was something that I really, I knew he always wanted. So as soon as I got word I was getting that third star, I reached out to him and I said, finally, a civilian's getting the recognition for what we do here. I mean, I had, 900 people. I had 180 million at that time with fleet, because I wasn't just fleet. I was fleet, property clerk, central records, and printing. We had $180 million budget, 39 locations, 900 people, and finally, I was made a deputy commissioner. And when Bratton came in, his question to me is, why are you the only executive director? You have more responsibility than most of these deputy commissioners. And so finally made me. He came in that January, but there was some stuff going on that they couldn't promote me right away. But eventually, and Panero pushed. Panero was the first step. He was the guy that brought me down to SSB. He was involved with some politics with the current chief that I wasn't even privy to and didn't even know about. I mean, it's so interesting. You get a call one morning, jobs like deputy commissioners and executive directors, they're not like they're really advertised. They kind of just like this happens all behind the scenes. So I got a call from the first step. I just recently, at the time, graduated from NYU with my master's from executive management. I was already working with the mayor's office on some stuff on the fleet stuff. And the first step calls me and asks me if I'm ready for more responsibility. And I said, yeah. And I thought it had something to do with the mayor's office because I was offered to be the commissioner of fleet for the whole city. They wanted me to take over all the vehicles in the whole city. And I would have had my own agency and I would have leased and did a chargeback for every vehicle, all 27,000. This was almost at the same time, around 2010, 2011. So we had with the different fleet stuff. So Bratton said, "Why are you the only executive director?" And he made me deputy commissioner. But yeah, it was a really proud moment to be a 3-star in the MY, and then being at the executive level, whether it was being the deputy commissioner or executive director or deputy commissioner. For 12 years, I worked directly with police commissioners. I worked for 5 different commissioners. I worked for Kelly. I worked for Bratton. I worked for O'Neill. I worked for Shea. Yeah. And then towards the end there, and everyone did a great job and were great guys and ladies to work for, but they all had very different styles of leadership. I mean, literally, Bratton to Kelly were like 180s, right? They're just
very much so.
Super effective, really, and I just enjoyed sitting at that executive table. I mean, Kelly would have executive meetings 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays at 3 in the afternoon. They only lasted 10 to 15 minutes, but everybody knew what was going on. And if I needed to talk to Kelly, I'd say, "Hey, boss, can I have a moment?" Or if he wanted to see me, "Hey, Bob, wait after, I want to talk to you about something." And Bratton continued the same thing. His meetings were once a week instead of 3 times a week. But it was so great to have the ability to interact with the police commissioner on a weekly basis without an appointment. Because so many things come across that people say, this is the police commissioner's pet project. The police commissioner wants to. Everybody uses the police commissioner's name, right? And you can my job, I got to find out, is this really what the police commissioner wants, or does someone think this is what the police commissioners want? Because I need the real world. And then switching gears, going into when you're dealing with stuff like 9/11, I was a lower rank, but Superstorm Sandy, I was the man during Superstorm Sandy. And we lost more vehicles in Superstorm Sandy than we did on 9/11.
Really? Okay. Wow.
It's funny, that we lost over 100-something vehicles, probably close to 150 vehicles total loss in Superstorm Sandy. Plus, we had a blackout for approximately 3.5, 4 days, Lower Manhattan. Hospitals are out. We had to do fueling for Light Tower. We had to actually deliver fuel to hospitals for the generators. I mean, there was no fuel for approximately 2 weeks coming into the pier. All the ports where the tugs come in and deliver fuel were shut down because of Superstorm Sandy. So there was no fuel in the whole metropolitan area.
Wow. And that's something that you had to contend with. Again, at least not that either situation was a tenable one to be involved in, but with 9/11, it's one compact area in Lower Manhattan where this is where it happened. This is the area that we're working with to figure out, as you said earlier, what's damaged, what's salvageable, what's not. There you had the whole city. Queens got it the worst out of all the 5 boroughs, but nevertheless, it's a citywide problem. And that was something that I guess, listen, if they didn't feel like you did a good job, they wouldn't have promoted you in 2014 to deputy commissioner, right? I mean, granted, it was a different commissioner by then. 2012, Kelly's still there. Bratton came in 14. But hey, it spoke volumes to the work that you and your guys did during that time. And Kelly was the one you worked for the longest because he was there so long, 12 years. I mean, I imagine that was a great relationship to
Yeah. I called him Dad.
have.
He doesn't know that, but yeah. I would say whenever I got summons to you, I say I got to go see Dad, and he would speak very close to you. He had a unique way. When you had to do one-on-ones, he would speak very close to you. I don't know if he thought the room was bugged or what, but but if he believed in you, he gave you full reign. The only thing is, he was the spokesman. Nobody was ever on the news other than Kelly, right? There was
Yeah,
no, there was, yeah. So
as it
whenever,
should be. Mhm.
yeah. And so Kelly was a spokesperson, and you never wanted him to read about something in the newspaper that you didn't tell him first. so that was the pressure. You had to make sure that you informed him. Even if you had to call him, or you wouldn't call him, but one of the security guys at 3 o'clock in the morning, hey, this is going down, or this happened. And then on another side, the guys don't know about is when you're in charge of support services, you're a non-patrol unit, right? So we get the guys that have medical issues. We get the guys that are under investigation. So the restricted cops, modified cops. I've had quite an array of police officers working for me. Everything from literally, I hate to say it, guys that end up being convicted of murder and guys who rape people, to guys that were found innocent. But in between, it can only be suspended for 30 days, and then we would get them. So I would have to babysit these guys quite often, these guys and girls, quite often. It was a side job, but it was a little bit hectic because sometimes you get these folks and you're not told what they're in trouble for until it comes out in the newspapers or a month or two later, and then you find out. We had a we had Cabeza, I think his name. He murdered people in liquor stores. He worked in a new car shop for a while. He had Michael Dow, the biggest drug dealer, and that guy worked in new car. He was assigned to the new car shop. I was a mechanic, and he was right next to me. When I saw the documentary on him, I was telling people about it because I lived it. He would come to work in his red Corvette with his license plate and stuff. So much history and stuff happened during my career there.
A man I hate for reasons that are well documented, but nevertheless, I didn't know that. That's pretty interesting. And again, it's not an easy situation to be in. You'd much rather a guy, hey, I got banged up, I'm on light duty. Hey, I got hurt on the job. That's a
Yes.
lot better and a lot easier to deal with. Yeah, listen, take it easy, don't hurt yourself again. You had plenty of those, but yeah,
Yep.
it can't be easy watching guys walk in there for that type of reason or worse. In the case of the other guy you mentioned earlier, where it's like, ugh. Yeah, if I shake your hand, I better count my fingers, So it's a shame. It's definitely a shame. A couple more things I want to hit on before we get to the rapid fire, and that towards the end, right before you left, because you haven't been retired that long. It's only been 2 years, where it wasn't just the auto division. It was Central Records that you had to under your purview. It was also the property clerks division too. And the budget doubled. I mentioned earlier you had a $90 million budget you were looking over, and that's no small, that's not chump change exactly, especially in a city like New York. It went to 161 million. So is it because the fact that you inherited more responsibility that the budget increased, or what were the factors behind that?
Right. Well, some of that budget, it's not operating budget. So some of that budget that we were responsible for really wasn't budget; it was money. So in the property clerk, we have a lot of money that we take in as evidence. So
Mm-hmm.
some goes to bank accounts, some money we actually have that we have to actually have the money. So that accounted for probably $50 to $60 million of that additional money. It was money we were responsible to account for, but it wasn't really working budget money. The majority of our working budget money is on the fleet side. And then we also, so you have your expense budget, and then you have your capital budget, which is what's used for the trucks and stuff like that. Expense budget, you got to spend it all within the 12-month period. But that was, But another thing to note is that the day I was retiring and filling out my paperwork, the warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn, burnt to the ground. The biggest.
I remember that. Yeah. Jeez.
So I'm getting calls about the warehouse, and I'm saying, well, it's not my problem anymore. And then I, believe it or not, I'm being questioned. Where was I? I said I was at headquarters filling out my paperwork. I'm not going to burn the warehouse down. I'm not a disgruntled employee. So it was quite interesting that would burn down like that because that warehouse got flooded during Superstorm Sandy. So during Superstorm Sandy, not just cars. I had 3 warehouses that got flooded. 6 feet of water in these warehouses. So
Yeah.
16. Well, in total, 13 to 14,000 barrels of biological evidence went underwater. The whole auto pound, 3,400 cars went underwater. And I had to deal with all that, and we had to deal with the evidence, and then we had to make the, Kelly, Commissioner Kelly said, Bob, you're in charge of the evidence, come up with how you're going to handle it. And we had to make it that the evidence is not going to be available. Any evidence that went underwater, we made it not available because it was cross-contamination. We didn't know if it was any good. And there was biological evidence that were in cardboard barrels. And you can do some research in that. And we had very few cases affected by evidence not being. I mean, even in Blue Bloods did a whole series. One of the episodes was on the property clerk burning down and how everybody's going to get out of jail. And none of that's true because it really didn't have any adverse effect on any cases because we crossed the T's and dotted the I's on how we dealt with it.
Yeah, you got some smart veteran cops. I mean, I like to think there's some guys there at the end of their careers that go there, that, they've been on the street, they've done their fair share of investigations, they know how to safeguard evidence, so that it helps matter significantly as well in the process of things. And I guess that does bring us to 2023. I mean, 37 years doing it. Did you age out? Or I don't think that applies to deputy commissioners.
Well, I was never uniformed, so I started.
Okay.
I could have worked as long as I wanted. I was the current administration, when the new chief of the department took over, Madry, me and him didn't see eye to eye. So I think he immediately went to because there was myself and three other chiefs. So there was four of us that were asked to retire within 24 hours of him being named chief of department.
Mm-hmm.
So he gets named chief of department. They get called into the PC's office, get asked to retire, and then the day after they got asked, I got called in, was asked to retire. So I would have liked to have worked another year, to be honest with you, but it worked out fine for me personally, and I'm doing really well with my consulting business now.
Nice.
Customers all over the world and stuff, and I'm really involved with developing, continuing what I'm doing with the NYPD in the fleet. I'm identifying the products that can save cops' lives. Everything from ballistics to brake pads to digital alerting for police cars. So everything that I'm doing is usually related to fleet and to hopefully save a cop's life or to stop a cop from being injured.
And that's the name of the game, ultimately, at the end of the day. And I think, not that we're going to go down the rabbit hole, this isn't that type of show, but given everything that has happened to those figures that you have mentioned, I think you won out in the end. Not that you're a vengeful guy, you're not, but I think Bob Martinez won, and they who shall not be named, zero. We'll leave it at that. So one of the things that did come up in the chat earlier before I hit up the rapid fire, Joe Maliga did ask this to your point. Sorry, Joe, I didn't highlight the question until now. But is there a chance the NYPD, because you're seeing certain fire departments do it, certain police departments do it, down the road, is there a chance the NYPD goes all electric at some point or never?
Well, depends. Once again, if a vehicle meets the mission and safe, it could. Like, so the New York City Sheriff's Department's going all electric currently. Right?
Okay.
They don't transport the people. Once a vehicle is made that meets, there are a couple vehicles that might meet the mission, but they're not cheap. Like the Rivian SUV would probably make a great police car, but they're not interested in going in that direction. The company's not into discounting it and making it into a police car. But what's available today, I mean, the Chevy Blazer, it's really, it's kind of on the tight side. In order to transport presidents, you got to put a cage in there, and you have to take the OEM seat out. You have to put a plastic seat in there, and then there's limited storage in the back. I would never go 100% with anything. I don't even like the amount of Ford Explorers we have today. There's too many of the same vehicle, because if there's a national recall, let's say there's a safety recall on brakes or transmission or vehicles going on fire, the whole NYPD's fleet could be put out of service in a minute's notice. If it's a serious safety issue, you never want all your eggs in one basket. So we need to come up with ways to diversify the fleet. So I think at some point there will be more and more electric. Like we have 148 of the Ford Mustangs out there. There's 108 of those are marked, 40 are unmarked. It's not the greatest vehicle to transport people in. We don't put push bumpers on them. It doesn't really serve the purpose, but when vehicles come out that meet the mission, I could see that number go up.
Yeah, and hopefully that isn't the case too. And I like what you mentioned about not putting all your eggs in one basket. I remember there was a department, it wasn't the NYPD, that literally once Crown Vicks were going out of service back in 2011 when they stopped making them, bought, kind of like what you mentioned earlier, 2 to 3 years worth of those vehicles just in case, because again, it's nice that there's progress on that front. It's not, I mean, you've seen the NYPD had smart cars, which got made fun of at the time, but again, you can understand the investment, especially for the Central Park precinct. But fleet wide, one goes wrong, and then we're going to go back to the old days. What, horse-drawn carriages, just like that, to respond to calls. Nobody wants that. So
Yeah. And then the smart cars, I had a lot to do with that. That was to replace the three-wheel scooter.
yeah,
Three-wheel scooter didn't have air conditioning. It wasn't a safe vehicle. Didn't have airbags. The smart car, I saw them when I went over to England, and I tried to do it with Kelly. Kelly Blue said absolutely not. I don't want my cops in the smart car. Bratton said, "What's something you always wanted to do that Kelly wouldn't let you do?" I said, "I want to buy some smart cars." He said, "Bob, you're in charge." And we bought the last 300 gas-powered smart cars in the world. And some of them are still running around today.
Yeah, some of them I've seen when I go down to the city. So time has flown by. It's been a great conversation. That brings us into the rapid fire, which is 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. You could say pass if you want. These aren't particularly hard questions, but the first one is, in the 37 years that you were a part of Fleet Services, favorite era of the NYPD's fleet and favorite car the NYPD had during that time?
Favorite car was the Caprice with the LT1 motor.
All right.
LT1 motor.
So that's 90s?
Yeah, 991.
Yeah, that's not a bad one. Second, best advice anyone ever gave you?
To be a duck. That we're going to go in cycles. What we do today, we might not do tomorrow, but let things roll off. Don't take it personal.
Oh, there you go. Good advice. And I guess in line with that, you could expand on it here. Anybody that's in your position, leadership, or any position, period, in the NYPD, as you were for a long time, where you're leading others, what advice would you give them?
Is to just be open-minded. Everybody likes to use the word for micromanage as if it's a bad word, but you have to micromanage a little bit, but you also have to give free rein, right? You want to let everybody run with it, let them have ownership of whatever they're doing, whatever the task you want them to have or thing they want to develop. Give them free rein, then reel them in, take a look at it, but let everybody, and I had an open door policy. Anybody could come talk to me. I don't care if you were the cleaner or a director. If you wanted to come see me, you had to make an appointment, and I would listen to you. That don't mean I would counteract what your boss wanted or anything like that, but I would have open ears to anybody, having open ears and being fair.
All right, that works well. Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
El Bagados down in the Lower East Side. Julio, the owner there, is a real cop buff. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's on Second between A and B, but definitely a place most people don't know about. But if you haven't been there, you're missing it.
Well, you know about it now. For those of you listening on the Mike the David podcast, whether you're retired or active MOS or bust like myself alike, get down there if you can. And fifth and finally, knowing what you know now, if you can go back in time and give advice to a younger version of yourself, what's the Bob Martinez of now telling the Bob Martinez of yesteryear?
Don't worry about them beating you up. I went home a lot of times beaten up. I had a director that absolutely, director and deputy director, absolutely, they hated me. At one point, they built an office for me and put me in the office. And I would, and I actually thought that they were smarter than me. And I would just think that I was dumb and that they knew more than me. And then as I went through the food chain and got their positions, I found out that they definitely weren't smarter than me. And the biggest thing was when I went down to SSB, which was almost like the wizard behind the curtain. I went in there and I go, this is, the office only had like 15 people in it. And yet they were the people we were always afraid of and always calling the shots. And I was like, this is SSB. This is who we were afraid of. And there was things like we needed overtime and they wouldn't give us overtime until like, an hour before a snowstorm. And then I found out that I could authorize overtime 24 hours ahead of time. It's just stuff like that. So don't let people bother you as far as beating you up. Be able to look yourself in the mirror and always have your heart into it and do the right thing and stay out of trouble and lead yourself. Don't listen to others.
There you go. Good advice. Again, the hour and a half. We're not even at an hour and a half. It flew by tonight. We covered a lot of ground tonight. I really do appreciate it. Thanks, of course, Victor, for the music, of course, backing the rapid fire. Before I give my shout outs and my goodbyes to the audience, if there's any shout outs you got, Bob, to anybody or anything that you would like to give, the floor is yours.
No, just I really would like to give a shout out to Commissioner Kelly for giving me the opportunities, and Commissioner Bratton and the commissioners that believed in me, and And I think the dividends is that the whole department benefited from me having the ability to make the decisions and really, keep the fleet, and not just the fleet, the property. There were so many areas within the support services that we improved. Every unit improved. Whether it was printing, whether it was, central records. We really did a lot of good work. And thank you to my staff, the people that worked for me and supported me. I mean, they were the backbone. They did the work. I just made their lives miserable. And question a lot. We would have weekly meetings, and like I say, there was times where I had to micromanage. But I really want to thank them for all the support, both from above and below.
Well said. And again, our shout out to them as well. Thanks to everybody who tuned in tonight. As always, you know how much I appreciate your support. I say it ad nauseum, but it's true. Without you guys, there is no show. So appreciate you guys always coming back and tuning in, whether you watched on YouTube, whether you watched on Twitter or X, LinkedIn or Facebook. It's always appreciated. So coming up next on the Mike to New Haven podcast, he was in ESU for 16 of his 20 years, 1985 until 2001, all those years in six truck. And that's Carl Russo, who's coming up for volume 53 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. Really looking forward to that. That'll be Monday at 6. And then next Friday, I'll confirm it, but we should be on. Former FDNY commissioner, 30th FDNY commissioner. He was the union head for a long time and then was tapped to become commissioner in 1996, a role he served in until the end of the Giuliani administration in 2001. You know who I'm talking about, former FDNY commissioner Tom Von Essen. We'll be here next Friday at 6 p.m. for another volume of the best, the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. So I look forward to that conversation with Tom, and of course the conversation Monday for the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit with Carl Russo. Now, for those of you listening on the audio side, I have the guy from Fleet Services, so how could I not pick this song from their 1984 album, Heartbeat City, The Cars, coming your way with the song Drive. Once again, So enjoy that from their 1984 album, Heartbeat City. In the meantime, on behalf of producer Victor, always on the ones and twos, doing a great job, and retired NYPD Deputy Commissioner Bob Martinez, I'm Mike Colón. We'll see you next time, everybody, and have a great weekend.